The Commission tough-speaking chairperson and a chief executive officer fighting to survive, determined to clear his name at any cost. It is the 7th day of August 2018. Exactly a year ago, the country was counting hours to the historic vote, one that promised to be the most transparent, the best carried out election in the history of this country. In the end, it became the first presidential election to be nullified. Also tonight, 20 years on, we remember the victims of the August 6th, 1998 bomb blast. Later, a personal interpretation to an artistic impression. But first, my take. Now, it's 1 year since Kenyans went to the election, and it is paramount to assess what has happened since then and determine what the future holds. Now, elections remain a challenge in this country. They excite emotions, cause disruptions, and leave a lot of devastation. This is because the election campaigns are generally organized around ethnic enclaves, and the results determine how national resources are allocated. Now, last year's election was acrimonious and precedent setting rather. For the first time in the country's history, the outcome of the presidential election were nullified because of gross malpractices, forcing a repeat contest. But the repeat was paradoxically snubbed by NASA coalition, which had won the petition. Instead, the coalition resorted to mass protests and a mock swearing in of its candidate, Raila Odinga. At the center of the Bungled polls was the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission, which has since fractured. Several commissioners resigned to protest against Chairman Wafula Chebukati, who they accuse of gross inefficiencies. They also questioned his leadership. On his part, Chairman Wafula Chebukati suspended Chief Executive Officer Ezra Chiloba, and their dispute is currently hanging in court. Consequently, the Commission suffers a serious credibility crisis. Everyone knows where we are today and how we got here. Concerns have emerged about the nature of our politics. The position has been softened, and Parliament is fast becoming a monolithic entity which remains a threat to democracy, corruption, ethnicity, marginalization, and security, and of course prosperity of this nation. Now, promises made by the Jubilee coalition to confront these vices are yet to leave any meaningful impact. We are also appalled by the early election, that's presidential campaigns that threaten to poison the political environment, trigger ethnic hostilities, and disrupt all plans for the economic revival. Although the next election is still very far away, that's 2018, 4 years to be precise, experience has shown that early preparations are important to create a level playing ground. As a first step, we must fix the IEBC and tackle the legal, administrative, technological, and economic issues that undermine the election and push the country off the cliff in every election cycle. In the words of Bernie Sanders, who is an American politician, elections days come and go, but the struggle of the people to create a government which represents all of us and not just the 1%, a government based on the principle of economic, social, racial, and environmental justice, that struggle continues. My guest tonight, Ezra Chiloba, the suspended IEBC chairperson, and my name is Ken Mijungu. Sidebar begins right now.
The first respondent failed, neglected, or refused to conduct the presidential election in a manner consistent with the dictates of the Constitution, and inter alia, the Elections Act, Chapter 7 of the laws of Kenya. The first respondent committed irregularities and illegalities inter alia in the transmission of results, particulars and the substance of which will be given in the detailed and reasoned judgment of the court. The court was satisfied that they did, and thereby embarrassing the integrity of the entire presidential election.
A good point to begin, because that's where August 8, 2017 ended. welcome to our program. I'd like to begin with your reflection based on that ruling. It was almost a year ago. It came much later, but we started on August 8th, 2017. Your reflection on that ruling, was it right? Was it wrong?
Well, I wouldn't say it was right or wrong at this point in time. I think what happened is that there was a dispute. Petitioners went to court seeking for justice. The court agreed with them. And for us, under the Constitution, we're required to prepare for fresh elections. That's a presidential election, which we did. And the petitioners who had filed the petition earlier did not participate. And we had an election that happened in October. And I think from there, we are where we are. We have a government in place, as Kenyans expect. But that said, I think we have to go back and ask ourselves, what are the specific things that, for the long term, we can be able to correct or ensure that at least all stakeholders agree that these are the fundamental ingredients
that needs to be corrected.
Yeah.
We'll get to that. Why is it so difficult to say, in your opinion, having organized the election and conducted the election, why is it so difficult to say whether it was right in your opinion or wrong?
I mean, I've got my own views, and I've expressed myself on this. The last time, actually, I was on Sidebar immediately after the nullification. My position was, and still largely remains, that in as much as the election was nullified, we still conducted one of the best managed elections in the history of the country. And that position still remains. All evidence points to that. Independent evidence points to that. But the court met the observation that it made. Whether it was substantive to nullify the election, in the opinion of the court, by a decision of the majority, I always say that, a decision of the majority held that there were irregularities and illegalities which necessitated the nullification.
Okay, and I wanted to begin at the beginning, where your reflection at that moment when that announcement was made, but I will not do that. Let's talk about you as a lawyer, not as the IEBC Chief Executive Officer. Do you, as Ezra Chiloba, believe in the rule of law?
I do.
Completely?
All the time.
Okay.
And I study all the time.
All right. Yeah. So as that announcement was being made, there's some orders that were made,
yes,
especially the order that you needed to comply with as IEBCs to open the service.
Right.
To date, it's never happened. How comes that part of believing in the rule of law never happened?
No, but that's an assumption you're making. You're making an assumption that we never opened the service.
Was it
opened?
I
think the server was opened.
Okay.
The server was opened. And maybe I should take you back a little bit. The issue of the server did not start with the petition. It started on the night of August 8th, when the results started trickling in. We had a meeting with political parties at the time. The chief agents represented the different political parties being present. And at some point during our discussions, they demanded that they wanted to access the server so that they're able to know or trace where the provisional results were coming from, to compare what was being screened as well as what was actually in the forms. And we facilitated that process. It took us about 4 or 5 hours to set up desks at the Bomas of Kenya and allocated each political party representative a desk to be able to see.
But even that they claimed about, they complained about Ezra. They said it's not sufficient. There was only one computer. But remember all those complaints.
Given where we started,
yes,
and the time that we were left with, we did what was adequate at that particular time.
Okay.
So, and I can tell you, the leading loggings that we ever had was about 58, and they were done by NASA, okay, then followed by Jubilee. Then there were other parties who did actually access. So when we came to the order of the Supreme Court, where they said we needed to provide access within 48 hours, actually it was much more about the logs. And we had all anticipated that at some point the Supreme Court might request us to share the logs that regards the transfer of the transmission of results, which we prepared well in advance. I think a week after the election, we started downloading those logs with the support of SAF and MOFO. So they used to download them and send them over to us. But when we presented that information to the political parties on that night, They said no, they wanted to do the downloading themselves, without understanding that the process was actually very complex.
But that's not the reason that was given in court.
Now, I'm explaining.
Yes.
And when they rejected that offer of having a pre-downloaded logs, what we did is that we facilitated the access. The problem was access was only achieved 2 hours to the close of the deadline
of the
48-hour period.
Okay.
And what the experts who were working with the political parties told us was, like, they did not have enough time, so they're going to prepare the report in the manner in which they prepared, and that kind of denied us the opportunity to complete the process, denied the political parties the opportunity to complete the process. Perhaps from a strategy point of view, what we could have asked the Supreme Court to do was to extend us more time, which
was impossible, because this
it was impossible during that particular time.
Really
I can tell you for certain, we never woke up on that morning when the court order was issued. We never went back to IEBC with the intention of sabotaging the process.
All right. How come you never defended that in court? Because what Kenyans remember are the reasons that were canvassed in court from Muite, that they were still asleep in France. They need more time to do that.
If you look at the time constraint at the time, we did not have, I would say, adequate communication between ourselves, who are the clients, who the lawyers, and the lawyers were presenting. We were making the submissions in court. And you remember when the report was presented, the lawyers were given 10 minutes to make a comment. And I don't think 10 minutes were adequate on such substantive matter.
But it was only one matter that they needed to present on.
I mean, but giving an explanation in the manner in which I'm giving, I mean, 10 minutes will not be enough. We're almost done with the 10 minutes.
All right.
So my take is that the greatest impediment during that particular time was time allocated.
So because of time, we're now agreeing that they were not able to fully access the server because of time.
Exactly. And you can read that in the expert's report, which says there was partial access.
Yes.
And I'll tell you also what also happened.
Yes.
That immediately the servers were, I mean, these political parties were able to access the servers, and the account holders were there. I could see some of the political party representatives walking away. One political party remained, and then we made frantic efforts to call the other people back, but they never came back.
All right. So you're saying they deliberately, when they had the time to view what is in the server, they
at least for the 2 hours.
Okay.
At least for the 2 hours.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So that happened, but Kenyans still believe the server was not opened, and as a result, we still don't know what results are contained inside the server.
No, I mean, first of all,
for August 8th.
I mean, if you're talking about we don't know the results contained in the server,
yes,
those logs are there. Those who've been able to request for those logs, they've been given. And if those logs are there, what you only need is interpretation. And I can tell you, NASA, for example, they were given 2 sets of logs. The logs in the KIMS, from the KIMS system, and the logs that was used to transfer from 34B, which was the results from the constituency to the National Tallying Center. But you know what happened? They prepared their own report on the transfer of results from the constituency to the National Tallying Center, and did not pay attention, or they deliberately refused to pay attention to the logs of the results from the polling station to the tallying center. And that is the information that was contained in those servers.
Okay.
And if you look at that data, every other person who's looked at that data from a very objective point of view, they agree with us.
All right.
I don't think there was anything unusual.
All right. Still on the rule of law, I'm just wondering, IEBC had to go to appeal. That I'm talking about the Court of Appeal, that's case number 105, right?
Which
Maina Kiai.
Yes.
Why did they appeal that decision? I mean, it was logic. Why was the IEBC?
I'll correct you.
Yes.
We never appealed that decision.
But it went to the Court of Appeal.
No, we never appealed the decision.
Okay.
We went to the Supreme Court through a constitutional reference, seeking for further interpretation
of the same
implication of that particular decision.
Okay.
And the simple thing was this: if you look at the High Court decision on the issue of transmission of results or results management when it comes to election, they made some very fundamental statements, which, according to us, had an implication in terms of how we manage the results. And one of the critical areas they mentioned was, with technology, there'll be no need of returning officer trooping to the National Tallying Center. That's the term they use.
Yes.
There'll be no need of trooping to the National Tallying Center. What they failed to appreciate that not in all instances will you be able to get network or infrastructure that will enable us to be able to process the results. And then they also said the results of the constituency are final. So if our interpretation was that if the results of the constituency were final and the returning officers were not necessarily going to troop the National Tallying Center, how were we going to verify those results at the National Tallying Center before we finally declare the winner?
Okay.
So based on that, that is how we ran the August 8th election. And based on that contradiction, we had to go back to the Supreme Court to seek further clarification.
Was it contradiction, or it was after this ruling from the Court of Appeal that affirmed the High Court decision on Maina Kiai? That is the time you went to the Supreme Court. It was not just...
We went to the Supreme Court as a reference to explain further what the implication.
From the Court of Appeal.
I cannot remember whether it was the Court of Appeal or it was... but I know we went to the Supreme Court to get further clarification on that.
But what I'm asking is the appeal, how was it lodged at the Court of Appeal? Because there's a case. I'm looking at it. There's a case. How did it get to the Court of Appeal if you did not resist the move to end the election at the polling stations? How did it end at the Court of Appeal?
The point was this.
Yes.
Election, when it comes to election management, the certainty in the process is the most important thing.
Yes.
That people must be able to know from the polling station through the process all the way to declaration, what are the procedures? And every person must be on the same page. How come IEBC had a different position over that and the court had a different position over that? So that is the clarification that we required.
Okay.
And you fast forward, come to October election.
26th. Yes.
We had to do a bit of adjustment in terms of that particular process after the Supreme Court clarified. But one of the things that we added in the October 26th election, we ensured that all returning officers reported at Bomas with the physical forms.
Yes.
Both
even on
Form
August
34S from the polling station,
yes,
as well as the Form 34B, which was the constituency results. They delivered those results, which were verified at the National Tallying Center, separate from the transmission. So it is a conference for all those interventions that sustained that election. But if we went with the Court of Appeal in the manner in which the Court of Appeal, in the manner in which they had decided, then there was contradiction.
Okay.
So we think that there are lessons learned in that particular decision that will help us clarify, provide more clarity in our new legal framework that which process of development must start yesterday.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we are concluding that IEBC indeed appealed that decision. That's how it ended in the Court of Appeal. Yeah. I still want to talk. We have about 5 minutes before we take the first break.
Yeah.
I'd like to talk also about the same thing, the rule of law. We had several times that interested parties, I'm talking about political parties, had voiced their concern over the manner in which IEBC insisted on using specific service providers. In February of 2017, the case was already in the High Court, right? It went up to June.
Which case? Clarify, please.
For procurement, appointment of Al Ghurair as the printing firm. Yes.
Okay.
So the case was still dragging in court as late as June.
Yeah.
As late as July, I think either 11th or 9th, it was still in court. And finally, you had to justify why you had to use Al Ghurair. And they started contesting it in February. Why didn't you just choose someone else?
Okay. If you do your research, you will discover that there were 7 cases on the ballot paper tender. 7 cases which we had to defend at different stages. And other than the appeal, most of those cases were instigated by outsiders who had interest in the tendering process. And when you remember that in 2016, when Parliament allocated to us the budget to be able to prepare for the election, one of the things we wanted to do was to have early procurement of critical materials for the election. And we went for open tender. And through the process of open tender, Al Ghurair actually won that particular tender. However, at some point, one of the political contestants went to the High Court for a review of that particular center. In fact, before that, there was a company that went to the review board to challenge the procurement process, even before we had awarded the South African company,
yes.
PAL Media.
Yes.
And when we went to the review board, what happens is that the review board agreed with the IEBC and allowed the process to continue. So based on that particular decision, we ended up signing the contract with the Lugurea. Now,
but they only agreed with the IBC because of time constraint. The presentation.
No.
It was late. It even went before the tribunal late.
No. You are mixing issues. We started the procurement in 2016. 2016.
Yes.
December.
Yes.
We already signed the contract.
But the time PAL Media, a branch of Novus Holdings, was going before the tribunal, it was much later.
They went to the tribunal much later. One of our arguments was that, look, you are filing your case outside the time.
Yes.
But even then,
that is the reason you won it.
No, that's not the reason we won it. Even then, the decision by the review board, because we had gone on a preliminary application where we are saying he's filed this matter out of time.
Yes.
But he said, look, every person has a right and they should be able to present it if need be. We should not stick to procedural impediments to violate, to impede the enjoyment of rights by other people. So at that particular point, this review board agrees with us. We proceed, we finalize the process, we sign the contract. I think it was sometimes in November or December. I cannot remember precisely.
Okay.
But come February, CORD then had filed a review at the High Court
of the tender process. Didn't it come much later?
It came after.
Willis Otieno won?
Yes. No, it came after. And by the way, always remember that Willis Otieno was representing PAL Media at the review board.
At the review board.
At the review board.
Very well, yes.
But after that failed, he went to represent CORD at the.
He was already in CORD then.
He had moved to CORD.
Yes.
So he went to CORD to represent CORD at the High Court. So at the High Court, of course, the decision is made that IEBC CEO did not have the authority to sign the contract. Why?
Okay.
Because commissioners were not in office.
Yes.
And remember, commissioners were not in office in terms of legality since they had resigned sometimes in September. The Isaka team.
Yes.
But they were there working like a caretaker commission. So that allowed us to keep on working. Yeah. So come February, that decision is nullified. The contract is actually set aside on the basis that there was no commission in place to enable the CEO to sign the contract. That was the main reason. Yeah. And for that, it meant that we have to go back to the drawing board.
Okay. I'd like to speak more about this, Ezra. So stay with me. I'd like to speak about, but I have to say this: nothing stopped Willis from acting for. I'm as a lawyer, right?
Nothing stopped him.
All right.
But you also political context.
Yes,
is always very important.
Yeah, because it will be interpreted you're acting for both, and that sometimes there was that explanation that perhaps that's why he was at the.
But politics being what it is, my friend,
you have
I know that legal intervention is also a political strategy.
We're coming back to talk about that legal intervention. Right, Ezra stays with me. We still have a lot to discuss, so stay here. We are coming back before we leave for this first part of this program. Let's take a look at some of your feedback on social media. All right, I'm told we're coming back with the feedback in the second session, but remember the hashtag you should be using is Sidebar at NTV Kenya at Ken Mijungu, and the SMS line is 20686. 20686. Send us your feedback. We'll be coming back to sample them. Stay with us. We're right back.
We have also strengthened and hardened the security around our infrastructure, and we're confident that the data we have is one of the best that we have in the country, and as far as biometric data is concerned.
And that biometric data has been questioned widely. In fact, let me go back to our initial discussion on this before we move to the next. Do you believe the question of who won the August 8th could have been settled by the simple act of opening the servers or having adequate time to view what was in the server? Do you believe the Supreme Court could have settled it?
I'm not sure, because, if you look at the manner in which the case was conducted and the reasons of nullification, one of the issues they actually said was the fact that we did not open the servers, quote unquote, or did not allow access, because, and as far as I'm concerned, even the report said there was partial access. The fact that that happened, it meant that they could only believe that it was compromised. The system was compromised. And you see, NASA was making an argument that the system was compromised. But for me, and any other person who is in my situation, or get an ICT person, I mean, that argument, I think, was too much for the situation.
Okay.
That those who argued, actually, I was in a meeting somewhere, and that those who argued that the court proceeded from the point of view that IEBC has done something wrong. Okay. So let's go find out what wrong is that. Mm-hmm. You see, when you proceed from that point of view, it becomes very difficult. So I would say, yeah, they nullified the election also because of the access. That's what they mentioned, that we could not prove transmission. But for us, we have a reason as to why, or we have reasons as to why that timely access was not enabled. And it's something that we have to reflect on as a country as we go forward in terms of how we address such problems. In
fact, it's also been suggested that even the duration the Supreme Court takes to handle the case should be reviewed.
And I'll give you another example.
Yes.
You see, on the 1st of September, that decision was monumental in a way that it impacts the political history of this country. And they read the summary judgment, and then they said, we're going to give you the detailed judgment, I think 14 days later. I think it was on 20th. So for a period of 20 days, we did not understand the details of what had led to the nullification of the election. But at the same time, we are preparing for the election, for a new election. So you're just imagining, you see,
what you should have done right, or what you didn't do right.
I think the best case should be, if the Supreme Court is going to make a decision on matters of election, it must give us a detailed judgment.
There and then.
Okay. That's the only way you create clarity and confidence. Because now there was doubt as to whether that time allowed to look for justification. And I believe in the Supreme Court. I believe, institutions. But I think you were also constrained by some of the challenges that were also for
because
IEBC.
Even that ate into the time that you had to prepare for the next election, which was on the 26th. All right. Let's go back to Otimofo and Al Gray. I've talked about the seeming obsession with these two companies. I want to know, do you believe these two companies did a good job?
Very good job.
Okay.
I can tell you, without fear of contradiction, that they did a very good job. If there were any challenges, were challenges around execution. Al Gray printed the ballot papers, packaged those ballot papers and results forms, as witnessed also by political party agents who happened to have gone to Al Gray in Dubai, together with the media houses. And they packaged those materials, sent them over to us. We used Postal Corporation to deploy those materials to the field. So if you look at the questions around the forms and standardization of the forms, was not about what Al Gray did. It was how the officers worked around those forms. You will end up printing a form, maybe messing up the only resources that you have, so you end up now getting another form that is not standardized or consistent with the rest of the forms. And those
for an event that indeed defines the future of the nation, that is inexcusable.
I can tell you, it's not inexcusable. As long as you're able to prove or to establish that there was no consistent pattern towards sabotaging the process. Because if you have 360,000 people, most of them just recruited from the different places in this country, your own villages, you're deploying them, you've trained them for 1 week. They have to be there to be able to carry this exercise. So you're always believing that under oath, they're going to do the right thing. But you must always provide a margin of error. And in this case, most of the things that happened were, I'll consider them within the margin of error. It was never intentional.
Your lawyer couldn't explain that when Lady Justice Mwilu confronted him with the same question to explain about the forms.
Lawyers are lawyers. I'm an election manager.
And you're
I do operations. I don't represent the commission in court. So we got ourselves in that situation. Lessons learned. How do we make sure that this does not happen in future, or we have a common understanding across the board in terms of what we expect from the field.
Do you think preparedness, early preparedness would actually mitigate that problem?
A lot.
If we have to print,
yes.
we know the August election is coming in 4 years. If we have to print in January,
yes,
at least we can go through it.
And that's why we went out to advertise for ballot paper supply in October, I think, in 2016.
Okay.
But we never signed a proper contract with Alugrea until late into June.
Okay.
Working under very strenuous circumstances. You asked about Otimorpho in terms of how
if you
yes.
thought they did a good job. So
yes. I answered that. Yes.
There is a notion that the integrity of the election was compromised the day Chris Musando died. I'd like to speak about that, but based on the fact that you had the opportunity to change, which you have explained, you had the opportunity to change even the supplier so that all these errors in the standard forms, the way they should have looked like, could not occur, the training of election officers and all those things. You had that opportunity, but it never happened.
No, that's not true.
You never had the opportunity.
This election, truth be told, this election was organized and conducted within a very short time period.
Which is true.
And you cannot say adequate time. I'll give an example.
In terms of tendering.
An open tender process, you must allocate it not less than 120 days. 120 days for you to be able to complete the open tender process. Okay. It's not just going out and advertise. There are certain timelines and procedures that must be followed.
Yes.
So if you are here in April and you want to have ballot paper suppliers on board for the August 8th election, there's no way you can start with an open tender in the hope of getting ready for the election. No way.
Okay, that's
so, and you can imagine, we started with open tender. That was nullified in February. We went back to restricted tender, which means get a few suppliers together and allow them to be able to bid. We went for a restricted tender, but what happened? There were 2 court cases on it, and we lost. In the first instance, we lost at the review board all the claims that the open tender was not properly structured. Then other people went to court to oppose that particular decision, but the High Court said, given the urgency of this matter, there's no way you can proceed. IEBC can make now an independent decision. So we are moving closer to the election, and direct procurement became an option.
The only option.
The only option. And why do you go for direct procurement? The law is also very clear. You go for direct procurement if the issue is urgent. Okay, we now have 3 months or 2 months to go, so it's an urgent matter. Or you go to a supplier that perhaps is the only one who provides that particular service. In this case, it was not only Alugrea. The only difference is that we had worked with Alugrea before, so they had a track record.
Yes.
So how else could I have appointed another supplier without following due process? By the way, there were so many people who came. People came with different proposals, politicians, business people, and you have to make a decision.
I remember I had an interview with you in your office when those timelines were compromised.
Yes.
I remember you stating that very clearly. So the integrity of the election, I wanted to discuss the notion that it was compromised. The election was compromised when Chris Musando died.
Yeah, there was that perception that was created. And it's regrettable that Chris died. And he died at a very critical moment. And given the profile that he had built during the electoral process, and then the shock comes to us that he's dead, that was actually, for us, the most painful and lowest moment in our work. There was only, you almost wish that we postponed the election, but then we could not. So, if you talk about the compromise system or compromise election, I think the question we ask ourselves, what were the roles of the different officers within the commission? What were their level of decision making or the technical credentials that they held to ensure that the system was intact? One thing I can assure you, and I've said this before, we worked with MOFO very closely. At no point did they give us passwords, or because the claims were that passwords were given to some of the officers, or the late Chris had passwords. No password was given to any officer before the eve of the election. No password was handed to any officer at the time. So saying that there were passwords which were held by IEBC officials, that is not true.
Which one was used several times? The chairman's password. Which password
now,
was this?
That's a totally different.
That is a totally
different.
Okay.
Which is related to the transmission of results from the constituency to the national tally. It was not part of the KIMS.
I remember during the demonstration
right.
of how the KIMS was going to work. Luckily, right. I was also there. I actually was supposed to also be the team that went to Dubai, but I didn't. Let's listen to this first, then we can talk more.
Okay.
In this election, the resource management is going to be very transparent, very open, and very accountable. First of all, resource transmission will happen at the polling station, not at the constituency level. Our systems that we put in place are going to transmit results direct from the polling station to to the constituency level, to the national level, and at the national tallying center. Now, these results that are coming from the polling station are going to be public. The moment they are transmitted, they are available for the public. They are available to the media.
Unfortunately, that was the last time he appeared on television. It was right here. And unfortunately, again, everything that Chris talked about did not happen. Actually, that's what went terribly wrong in that election.
What did not happen?
Transmission. You know,
but it's wrong for you to claim that it never happened.
But the court found that the transmission, on that basis,
the court faulted the process
of transmitting
based on certain facts.
Yes.
And those facts were not that there was no transmission.
It didn't happen.
Let me explain now. Okay. Let me explain. Transmission, when we designed the system from the word go, before, and you know we designed the system before the minor KI decision, we said there will be two types of results that will be transmitted. There will be the text data and the form, accompanying form, because the law talks about the form has to accompany, the form must be transmitted, the prescribed form. So the text data was being transmitted because that had been our tradition. Always you see transmission happening on our screens. True or false?
True.
What are those?
Results, provisional results.
Where do they come from? Polling stations. So we went with the idea that we have provisional results being transmitted in the text data, but the actual result will be in the form that is also transmitted where possible. And I'll tell you, for all provisional results,
where possible, there was no option for where possible. There was no option.
But allow me to explain.
Yes, but there's no option.
If there's no option,
yes,
what you do? You have to do what you're supposed to do. Secure the integrity of the election. Secure the will of the people by securing the ballot papers, the forms, so that you avail them when necessary. So, and we communicated with the country. We had a challenge. When it came to transmission of the provisional results, we had 100% transmission. In 2013, we had 48% transmission of provisional results. In 2017, we had 100% transmission of that. However, when it came to forms, given the nature of the forms, a little bit heavy, needs a bit more network, by the time we were closing, we had a full transmission of more, I will say, talk about the balance, about 10,000 that had not been transmitted fully. And what happened is that where there was failure of transmission in terms of the actual form, the polling station officials will carry that form back to the returning officer, who has to verify the results, using So
I agree with you, Ezra, on that. I agree. Remember earlier you agreed with me when you said I was at the demo. When Chris Musando, a lady from Otimofo, and you were right there, the chairman wasn't there, and you agreed with me. And one of the things that Chris made clear was that there was no way you're going to transmit the text data without the form. Actually, when I saw that you could not hit send without attaching the form, how comes 10,000 missed these forms?
I would say that largely it was because of the network situation that we found ourselves in. And when we communicate with the country, some of the network challenges we're going to experience. In this country, Safaricom has the largest coverage. But there are certain areas where they had coverage, but they were not the primary transmitters. And so you gave it to another company. And this was negotiated around the table, the network service providers, as well as political parties, ICT representatives. So it was a model that was agreed on. But when it came to the execution on the ground,
it failed.
Those forms were never transmitted. But the question was, was the will of the people compromised?
Before
Just
you go-
because
the
of the
forms were not
failed.
transmitted.
That's the question. I think that's the most fundamental question.
But Ezra, tell
Yes.
me this. We were told that these Ken's machines will not submit any form of data if it's not complete. So the first thing you get to the polling station, switch it on, and that's when the polling station opens, right? And at the end of it, when you close the system, that's when it closes also, right?
Yes.
And we were told that you cannot submit the text without the scanned form.
Yes.
In fact, if you hit send in the demo without the form, it refuses to go. How did it happen?
No,
How did it
in
happen?
my recollection,
Yes.
what actually happened is that while that was the procedure, there was a dialog box that always popped out on the screen
Every time
And
you do a
a certain
process,
process.
yes.
So it will ask an officer, do you want to send the results now? Then it will say yes. Then you attempt a number of times.
Yes.
Then if you got to the third level and establish that you're trying to send the form and it's not going, it will ask you again, do you want to send the results without the form? And some officers will choose that.
Okay.
But the procedure, because that was embedded in the system, but the procedure, and whether it came in after the Maina Kiai decision, trying to adjust the system at the time when we were almost
Done with the whole thing.
done with it. So my question is, did the election get compromised
Okay,
just
because of that.
failed transmission?
Okay.
And if the answer is no, how else would we have addressed that problem when it came to dispute resolution? I think that's a core question.
The
that
core
we should
question.
be asking.
We have dwelt on that. I'd like to ask one more question on that. But before we ask, let's listen to the Chief Justice.
The major ground we annulled the presidential petition was transparency. The parliament passed an act just a few months to the election and said results from polling stations have to be transmitted electronically. That was not done in the first round. Quite a number of areas they were not done. We were told of network and so forth, but that was not true, and they know it. How can you talk of no network in an area like Kisumu town? How can you talk of no network in places here in Kiambu, some in Nakuru area within town? And you don't get an explanation. When we went for the second round, we had transmission. What made the difference? IEBC didn't want to do its job properly. So the results were not transmitted as required by the law.
All right, and of course you've mentioned a few of those, the network challenges, but network challenges in the places like Kisumu, I mean, it was absurd. And the Chief Justice mentioned it.
No, and that's what I'm telling you. I mean, just reflecting on what he said. With all due respect to the Chief Justice, and he means well for this country. I know him at a personal level. The only difference is that when we're out there in the field, we're the ones who are operating these things. If we're ever given the benefit of doubt in terms of you are the institution mandated to carry out the election, so you must proceed from the point of view that you've done the right thing. And if there are exceptions, are you able to explain those exceptions? Okay. For example, he talks about the second election having had full transmission. The model that was developed for transmission for the second election was significantly different from the one in the first election. If you realize in the second election, we never used to have the provisional results. What we had was an Excel sheet of results that had been verified at the Bomas of Kenya, which were being projected on the screens. And it was also made successful by the fact that returning officers were requested to come to the National Tallying Center with the Form 34Bs and 34As from the polling station so that verification can continue. So to what extent that also related to what had been transmitted, I mean, for efficiency purposes, I think there's a lot of changes that had to happen at the time. So the manner in which we fixed in terms of the manner in which we managed the results management of the second election, it was a combination of both technology and physical delivery.
And of course it was not so acrimonious, so
it was
so contested.
It was not contested.
Yes.
But this is what you actually end up getting when you have uncertainty in the legal framework, and then you have a legal framework that is not consistent with the general infrastructure environment in which we operate in, you end up having such a difficult situation. Ask all election experts, people who've been able to look at the Kenyan election. They'll say, you know, we were trying to run an election in an ideal world, but come back to earth. Okay. Where does the will of the people reside?
Which is very true. Yeah. I'm just concerned because during the presentations, the demos that we witnessed and the whole media house fraternity in the country witnessed, we were never told that there could be possibility of transmitting.
But that's not
without,
true.
Yeah. So you
but that's not necessarily
possibility.
True. I think the procedure of how you checked off that particular process at different stages is perhaps what led to that.
Then how was he to guarantee integrity if there was that loophole to transmit data without the scanned form? I mean, that was a apparent gaffe, you know.
But let me ask you, and this is what I'm telling us as well, that if you look at the October election, yes, it wasn't contested, but the procedure was totally different. Okay. I think the over-reliance on technology is the one that impedes a successful, simple, transparent election. And we must have a reflection on that. Okay. Previously, it used to be ballot boxes, black ballot boxes, that, you know, we need to have transparent ballot boxes. Yes. We moved from that. In 2013, it was about the register a little bit. In 2017, it was about the servers. So after the servers, where do we go next? So my take is that there are certain fundamentals in our electoral process that must be addressed.
Okay.
Being driven by the view that elections must be simple, that the person in the village must be able to interpret that particular election. Okay. When it comes to ICT and servers, my grandmother in the village doesn't understand what the servers are. Okay. Yeah. So my take is that we need to move away from that.
Okay. Yeah. All right, I'd like to take a feedback now. We are taking a break. We still have a lot to discuss, probably 2 more areas before I let Chiloba go. But let's take a look at some of your feedback. And let's begin with the tweets on the screen right now. From Ronald Duteno says, Ezra Chiloba is very composed. He's engaging in very profound discourse of what really happened in 2017. And that's why he's here. On you text messages, that's on 20686. Kenyans have democratic rights to elect leaders of their own choice. Electoral malpractices should therefore be eradicated, and early preparations should be done by the IEBC. And one more here, why did Chebukati and Chiloba start accusing each other after the election? Do they hold different political backgrounds? I'd like to talk about that. It's just one of the issues we're going to next, about his relationship with the commissioners and specifically the chairman of the commission. We take a short break. Keep your tweets coming. We'll be sampling in our next break. We'll be sampling a lot of them, but now we take a break. We'll be right back with Chiloba, and when we come back, we'd like to discuss your personal relationship and professional relationship with the commissioners, some of who have resigned by now. We take a break. We'll be right back.
I've made several attempts to make critical changes, but all my motions have been defeated by a majority of the commissioners. Under such conditions, it's difficult to guarantee free, fair, and credible elections. Without critical changes in key secretariat staff, free, fair, and credible elections will surely be compromised. I therefore call on the staff who have been adversely mentioned to step aside to allow this project team to function without interference. We can still salvage the situation if we put our country first.
All right, and several months later, probably 6 months later, perhaps he made good what he said at that time. When he said that, he was basically calling on any of the staff who felt they compromised the election or had 1 or 2 things to do with the nullified election to step aside. But 6 months or so later in April, we saw him write a memo suspending you. That's where to begin.
I think I'll take you back. I mean, those clips in my memoirs, which I'm writing, they have a lot of context. And given my position where I was and looking at the institution, there's so many things that you'll never talk about in the open, partly because you're looking at the greater good of the institution. When we went into the election, even before the August 8th election, there were complaints by the political players, different from both sides actually, only that it was not as pronounced and in the public domain like it happened after the nullification. After the nullification, what we saw is that the political class narrowed down on certain officials, me being the lead, and about 7 of my colleagues, being accused of having messed up the election, and for that reason we must give way. But then, of course, the other side of the political divide, Jubilee decides is also going to have a list of their own. So we ended up being 17 of us on a list being accused for being not good enough to prepare for the election. So, and at that time there was a lot of political stalemate in terms of how we proceed in terms of preparation. You remember NASA had all these, I think, 13 points issues that they wanted to be addressed. Jubilee had a different position, but then the commission had to make certain decisions. So at that time, and you can feel the chair. I was in the office and watching the press conference. It happened immediately after Commissioner Rosalina Kombe had resigned. And that morning, I had made effort to ensure that if there was going to be a response on the resignation of Akombe, then I'll be able to provide feedback. I didn't see that. Then, of course, I saw the clip. But my heart was very heavy at the time, and I thought that something needed to be done. At some point, I felt like the organization was falling apart at a very critical moment. That was on the 18th of October, if I'm right. I think it was on the 18th or 19th of October. So I made up my mind and I said, given where we are now, and given that the chairman is so concerned that the political class is pushing us to that particular level, and some of them do not want to participate in the election, something had to be done. And I offered to take leave myself.
At that point, no political class had said that they're not going to participate in the election.
No, there were rumors. You remember that the elections was to be fast on the 17th of October.
Yes. And
there was a campaign that we're not going to have elections on that. So it was already a build-up towards that. So when that happened, I made a deliberate decision that given that the operations for the elections were more or less set, and there was a project team that had been appointed by the commission, whatever remained was largely administrative. I will let the team run for that 1 week period, then we have the election. Because my own personal view was that the chairman felt he had this heavy load on him. And I said, I'm going to be part of the people who's going to help him. But by doing so, and why I took leave at that particular time, I was also avoiding my own staff being victimized by the political class. Because assuming the 17 of us had gone, then obviously we're going to have challenges in running the election. So people had to remain. And for that reason, I took leave to also protect my officers and protect the electoral process.
Okay.
Yeah.
A lot of people think you only took leave because your job was done. Basically what they're saying is you held a brief for some people at the IEBC and your job was done.
I mean, I've been accused by all manner of things. And I can tell you, when you're managing a political process in a fractured society like ours, you receive all manner of things to the extent that professionalism almost doesn't count for anything. So when you're dedicated, you're working, people will create all these perceptions around you. When I joined the IEBC in 2015, for a period of 6 months, consistently, they kept on accusing. The Jubilee side used to accuse me that Raila Odinga's person within the commission. And at some point when Isaac Hassan was, and the team were being asked to leave, there was a proposal to get the CEO also out, who had only been there for 8 months. Why? Because they didn't know me and they doubted me. They thought I was a nasty person. Fast forward, the commissioners leave. We have new commissioners. Now this time around the bad guy is Chiloba. The new commissioners are the good ones. So the Jubilee, no, the NASA people now started accusing me for being Jubilee. They've moved on. And that kind of ping pong game continued. I can tell you, without fear of contradiction, that my dedication to the commission was based on what I believed in terms of the rule of law, and what could also build us as an institution. I did not just go there to look. I did not go there to look for a job.
Okay.
I know it was not going to be easy. So all these accusations will be there.
Okay.
And by the way, the farmer you are,
the more the accusations fly.
the more the accusations fly.
All right. Do you have a personal relationship with the deputy president of the country?
I don't.
Friendship?
I don't. I've been accused this way. I've been accused to be very close to Uhuru Kenyatta, which is not true. There was a rumor at some point that, I got family relationship within the Uhuru family. It's not true. My picture was out there playing around with images of other people, which is not true. They accused me of being very close to Deputy President William Ruto. The reason that one Mr. Abraham Singwe Korir was my former colleague.
Yes.
We have colleagues all over. By the time I was being recruited in IEBC, none of these people knew who I was. And if you review even the newspaper cuttings those days, you could see opposition. Some of them from people I knew very well. I mean, I thought I knew, accusing me for being prepared to rig elections. And I can tell you without fear of contradiction that I went to IEBC with a single mind.
Okay.
To do what a professional election manager should be able to do.
All right. Yeah. You mentioned the time you're mentioning about Novus Limited, PAL Media.
Yes.
You mentioned when you mentioned Willis,
yes.
and I said there's nothing that stops him from acting from the other side.
Yeah.
You also mentioned that political perceptions are important. Korir is your friend, and he is a legal advisor of the deputy president. Obviously, the political perception matters.
And I can tell you,
yes,
we never, ever discuss with Korir on matters of election. Never, ever. And I can count how many times we actually got in touch. And we did that on principle, knowing that him being there and me having gone to IEBC, there was always a possibility that people will accuse us for such relation. And yet, he was my first boss. And I will always be grateful for him, because immediately I finished my pupillage, the following day I got a job in his organization, which I hold so dear. But when it comes to professionalism, everyone keeps his own line. Okay. And that's what has been.
Let's get back to my question.
Yes.
The suspension. Did he make good what he wanted to begin at that time? Because we feel you were one of the targets at that time. Yeah. You were accused broadly and widely.
For obvious reason.
Yes.
Yeah, because perhaps, at some point I was the face of the commission when it came to election preparedness. During the time Isaac Hassan had agreed to leave, and I was there, it's me who ushered in the new commissioners as well, and we had prepared the election. So at all this, during this period, perhaps I would say I was a person who had institutional memory and pushing my staff to be able to do what is right. So given that particular profile, I became the easy target. Okay. Of course, when it comes to suspension, which matter is actually in court, we're still fighting in court, and I will not get into the details. But that said, I will say that my relationship with the commissioners and what led to that particular suspension is an issue that has been contested. Out of that, that 3 commissioners actually resigned. Now we only have 3 commissioners. It's not a situation that I would have loved to see. When I went to live in December 2017, in October 2017, I came back believing that now the elections are over. We're able to put the house in order. We're able to carry out the audit for the finances that we had spent in the election. We carried out post-election evaluation as per our elections roadmap, but that did not happen. So I think we spend a lot of time now being like, what was the role of the CEO, so forth and so forth. Okay,
let's listen to the reasons Chebukati gave for suspending him.
Commission had received internal memo, a preliminary memo, internal report, from our internal auditors, which greatly mentioned the CEO in terms of the activities which were being audited, and implicates him in most of the activities.
It's curious, your suspension and the leaking of 2 memos. Yes. I'd like to begin with the first memo.
The 12-point memo.
Yes, the 12. Yes.
So
Did you adequately address them personally with the chairman?
I did not address personally with the chairman. I addressed them with the commission.
With the commission, the whole commission, minus the conduct.
I'll also tell you the,
Yes.
the context. You know, sometimes it's good to provide context. What happened to this memo is that it was written to me. I think it was on the 4th of September, if I'm not wrong. And the issues therein were heavy issues. And actually they got me by surprise.
8th of September.
8th of September.
Yes.
Okay. There were very serious issues of concern, which also shocked me. And I asked the chair that given the nature of these questions, I cannot respond to them alone. We must be able to work with the secretariat team to be able to provide clarification in areas that you've requested. So we had that engagement. 2 days later, I think I received another memo demanding that I be able to respond by a certain time. So, but these are serious issues.
Which was leaked.
Yeah. So I asked for more time. Then we had a meeting in the morning, trying to see how to work together as a team. And as we were seated there, I saw breaking news, the grand memo to CEO Chiloba. Of course I knew. I knew the seriousness of the issue. But the fact that it was with the media.
Who leaked it?
I don't know.
Who do you think leaked it?
I don't want to comment on it because I want to have facts. But I can tell you, that was not professional. Whoever did, it was not professional. I think it did not help the institution. And I think that was the beginning of instability within the institution.
Okay.
But in terms of response, thereafter we had a meeting, the whole commission. Some commissioners actually said, I would say all commissioners said that they had not seen that memo. So it was chairman in his own volition who had prepared the memo. So
is that the procedure for memo?
I will not comment on that.
No,
but
let
me so that I don't lose track of my thoughts. So they said, given the issues that are being raised being very critical, what the secretariat needs to do is to provide proper responses. Then we're going to have a meeting and review those responses. And we had 2 meetings to review the responses prepared by the secretariat. The only difference is that our responses never leaked.
Were never given the prominence.
And we personally said, to distinguish the manner in which information is managed, I will not be able to leak that information.
Was there a request to leak the information?
No one asked me to leak information.
Okay.
And I'll tell you something else. That immediately after that, after the responses, there was another response to my memo seeking for further clarification. What happened? That memo was also leaked.
The 19th one? 19th
I cannot remember the date.
Yes.
It was again leaked. So to me, if you ask me, whoever was behind that did not have the good, was not doing it in good faith. And to create a situation that, if there was anything that went wrong in the election, then it's the CEO and the secretariat or maybe a section of the commissioner. That is what it seemed to create. It created more confusion, and I don't think it helped the country. Today, there's a lot of reference to that, and yet there's no proper understanding on actually what happened.
Okay.
Yeah.
A divided commission. Do you agree that your commission at some point, you said from the leaking of the first memo, that's where the trouble in paradise began.
Yeah.
Do you believe you were divided then or before? Because right from there we saw the division, it was very apparent.
I think the divisions were more apparent when it came to after the nullification of the presidential election.
Okay.
Prior, I would consider whatever we had as normal disputes that happen. You get into boardroom discussions, which is sometimes heated, but we make a decision, we carry on as a team. But after the nullification of the presidential election, then you could see a little bit of push and pull, different positioning happening. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there was division. Before we proceed, let's listen to Musalia Mudavadi.
And the division was largely on how do we proceed, for example, to the next election. Yeah.
All right. Let's listen to this.
The institution that is called the IEBC is in shambles. It's riddled with corruption. They are taking each other to court. And 1 year has lapsed since the last election. and we're not seeing a serious effort to resolve the issues surrounding the IEBC.
That's the political head. Do you agree with him as IEBC currently is?
Partly, I agree with him, but on other things I disagree with him totally. What I agree with him is that the commission as it is got challenges in terms of the governance structure. We don't have 4 commissioners of the 7 that are required. Now that also poses challenges when it comes to policy decision making, and that has to be addressed. But most fundamentally, I think what we need to be facing is how can we make the operations and decision-making processes within the IEBC efficient and effective?
Okay.
And that to me is revisiting the issue of the relationship, for example, between the Secretariat and the commissioners, revisiting the issue as to whether the commissioners must be executive or be just policymakers, revisiting the issue as to whether the commissioners should be full-time or be part-time. And that issue has been discussed before, but we've never found a practical solution to it. And this is the time to start reflecting on that as a country and exploring options that will help us strengthen the institution as it is. So, yeah, partly true, we need to be debating the future of IEBC. And since we also said that we needed to start early preparation for the coming elections in 2022, it's important that we have a stable commission that is fully functional with seamless, proper relationship between the Secretariat and the commissioners at that level.
I still want to ask you about the relationships, and I'm wondering the kind of relationship you had with Commissioner Kombe.
I've always avoided talking about it. I've always avoided talking about it. But let me just say this. We have the same background. She worked for the UN, and I also worked for the UN. We know the type of people who work in that particular environment. And when she came to the commission, I think we found her to be one of the most experienced commissioners when it came to actual election management, given her, her traveling and the terms of reference. And I'll consider it, we related very well from a very professional point of view. That I must say. I think she was very analytical, very strategic in thinking. She was also very articulate, and that's why she was on media most of the time. And I would say that she would console me quite a bit when it came to the issues around the critical issues around the media and stuff like that. But what became apparent after her resignation is that I think there was this quiet or passive aggressive relationship whereby she had her own views about the Secretariat, and I was the one kind of protecting the Secretariat most of the time, which is really my job. And seeing some of the memos that have come into the public domain, I can tell you that some of them, and most of them, were never copied to me.
You never saw them?
I never saw them.
But you're the chief executive
I'm
officer.
the chief executive. I never saw those memos that she used to write to her colleagues and raising issues that related to the election. And not on a single occasion was that memo copied to me. You can check. Even what has been published out there, you can check. I was never copied to any of her memos.
Okay.
But one day I landed on one. We were having a training at I think Safari Park, and I landed on one memo. I looked at it, and I told the person who was having the memo, I told him, no, this one is it's prepared for purposes: 1, leaking; 2, resignation, justification for resignation.
Okay.
A week later,
she resigned.
So I believed that we were professional colleagues, but again, what happened. I think there was too much mistrust.
Okay.
Yeah.
And finally on this, the resignations, right? They were also split right across when the vice chair and the other two commissioners resigned. It was the same time you were suspended. So it was seen as though they were resigning in protest to how you treated.
Maybe it's true, and I think they have the right to do that. But look, what happened is that we have 6 commissioners. I mean, 5 plus the chair. And there was this issue of responding to audit queries, and chair had written to me a memo sometimes in January or February, I think it was February, for me to be able to respond on some of the procurement issues, which were highly, I would say, administrative issues. Why is this document missing here? Why is this? Why was this not done for this particular contract? Why was the standard form of the contract not used? Things like those. And we went to this meeting, and the initial meeting, issues were raised. And when issues were raised, I remember very well, commissioners were divided in the middle. One said, 3 of them said we are satisfied by the responses by the CEO. 2 of the 2, one sought further clarification on one specific issue. Then on the other, one said, I'm not satisfied on this particular issue, and I recommend that we take this thing to the internal audit. So it was taken to the internal audit. The internal audit presented the report to the commission through the chair, but had never given me the benefit to be able to look at those issues as the CEO, because eventually they have to be responded to by me with the support of the Secretariat. So I never saw those issues. So on the 6th of April, we show up at the boardroom, and that matter comes last for discussion. And they asked me to leave the office, to leave the boardroom, the note taker to leave the boardroom. So there were 6 of them. And the 6 of them sit, and I don't know how the discussion went.
Was that procedural?
I mean, the law says for every commission there shall be a secretary. And the secretary is the CEO.
Yes.
So in this case, my argument is that there was no secretary. There was no note taker. So we'll never know actually what happened. The only thing I saw is that when I got home at night, I received a memo which said, you've been requested to go on compulsory leave following a decision of the commission. But that's when I knew that the decision was not unanimous, and there were actually divisions. At this particular time, there were only 5 commissioners. So 3 commissioners voted to send me home, and then 2 commissioners opposed it. 1 commissioner was out of the country. So I think that is what led to the acrimony and eventually those
resignations.
Resignations.
Finally on that, the fact that 3 commissioners could come out clearly and fault the chairperson and say he's ineffective. They use so many other terms. Let me not read them. But if they could come out and speak to the character of the chairman, could you do the same? Could you speak to the character of the chair?
Well,
in terms of management,
you see, I have my place as a CEO of the IEBC, and there are certain things I cannot talk about.
Okay.
The commission has had challenges, since the new commission, but we were able to resolve those challenges to ensure at least we had the elections happening. So, given where I am now, I will not talk about that. He's chair because he's qualified to be chair.
Okay.
Of the commission.
Before you resign, this is one thing that they said. Instead, under Chebukati's leadership, the commission boardroom has become a venue for peddling misinformation, grounds for brewing mistrust, and space for scrambling and chasing individual glory and credit. Would you agree? You sat in those boardrooms?
No comment.
No comment on that.
Yeah.
You didn't want to comment on that.
No.
All right. I think it's time. We need to end. But before we end, I'd like to ask you, what's the kind of relationship that you have with the Musando family right now?
At the individual level?
Yes, individual level. Do you see the wife? Do you speak to the wife if she speaks to you?
Yeah, before the April issues of suspension came up, I had actually prepared to meet the family. I worked with my HR team, and we were going to visit with the family, talk about issues. I spoke to her on phone and prepared for that, but the meeting never happened, given what transpired after that. But once in a while, there's an exchange of messages of encouragement. It's now been 1 year since the demise of the mother of the husband. I think what she needs is more support, more encouragement, and the commission, given the HR policies, has a way in which such issues, some of the concerns that she had raised at the time, were going to be addressed. So I suppose that maybe this progress has been 4 months. So
and you didn't know because you're out. Almost 4 months now, right?
Yeah,
almost
4 months. Yeah, so I wouldn't know what else.
All right, the reason why I'm asking is I want your personal interpretation of this cartoon. All right, you can see it right there on the screen. That's a picture depicting you and, of course, the chairperson and grave of Chris Mijungu, and sort of you waving them to move on.
Yeah, I saw that cartoon,
Yes.
and I thought it was a bit too much in terms of depicting the situation. Around the family. I want to believe that they were using that for symbolism purposes. And being a public servant, in my position, and also the position of the chair there, you come under a lot of criticism. So I suppose this was a critique, calling us to action in terms of addressing the issues surrounding the death of Chris Mijungu. First is the family, then the other is about maybe having complete investigations and to ensure that justice is actually done. So yeah, I looked at it, and most of these things, sometimes they bother me, but I also realize that I'm in public office, and I'll always be defined in different ways. But I can also assure the family that the IEBC policies, HR policies, are adequate to help the family address some of the concerns that they had raised. But most importantly, I think the government, especially the DCI department, needs to perhaps fast track the investigations into the matter of Chris, so that we bring this matter to a closure. It's really our desire.
And you have family. I just like to know the understanding of your family, your wife, your kids, probably your relatives, because these accusations have been flying around, you know.
I mean, a lot of accusations come on my way. This leave has enabled me also to interact a little bit more with the family, friends, to also try to explain what actually transpired, because there's a lot of propaganda out there. One of the things you will forever be grateful is having a family that trusts you, that believes in you, that knows you, because during difficult times they will always be there to stand for you. So I know my kids are very young, but my wife has been very supportive. My parents, who for a long time I had not seen, until last year, I went to them, and the fact that I kept on interacting with them brought a lot of healing to them. And this now we're also extending to our friends. I meet a lot of people who come visiting, or I go visiting places, schools, to explain a lot of these things. And I think with the time people will come to an understanding of actually what happened.
All right, I'm going to ask you finally for what you're doing currently, that you're on suspension, and if you do something different. But first, let's take some of your feedback, and I begin with the text messages on 20868. And the first one here from Mwangi Timao says, 1 year is gone, yet IEBC has not resolved past problems. How can we make the institution great for the future with no interference from political merchants? I think you've answered that on what to do with the commission. And Julian Rower says, Ezra Chiloba is brilliant. He has been condemned and heard. I absolutely agree with his take on these issues. And Chiloba is just blowing hot air. What he has done is just tap dance around the issues. His long-winded is nothing but a smokescreen. That's from Adrian from Mombasa. And the last one is Chiloba, was it not possible to screen provisional presidential results as they troop in from the constituencies instead of bringing results showing a consistent margin of 12 different sent by someone from Moyale? In fact, just in 30 seconds, the fact that there was that consistency in the difference between Raila Odinga and President Kenyatta.
Which election?
That's the 8th, August 8th. That consistency.
The 8th August. And maybe if we're given an adequate time, we'll have a symposium or conference on technology and elections and what happened. I'll explain to you a little bit.
Just briefly.
The elections were coming from the results were coming from polling stations, and when they come from polling stations, this polling station has a maximum of 700, but on average I think there are about 250 voters in that particular polling station.
Yes.
So usually, and this has been observed the world over in our own elections previously, once you send results from a significant sample at random, because you have no control over it, at a certain point that number stabilizes in terms of percentages. It stabilizes. Why? Because it's randomly sent in results and is scientifically proven. So you wouldn't say that once, and I think when it got 1.5 million votes or something like that, we started seeing the curve going towards stability, and that is expected. In fact, that's the normal graph that you should be able to
I think this is technical.
So that's technical.
We'll not understand it. All right, let's look at the tweets just briefly. Bring it. Okay. Loving the discussion on election management. That's on Sidebar. The hashtag we've been using is Sidebar. And Chiloba does Chiloba agree that we need to have a full and independent audit and reforms the entire election system from registration to adjudication of petitions well before 2022? Perhaps by 2020 we should be done with that.
Actually, that is the work that we should be doing now. That's part of the post-election evaluation. That should be part of it.
Okay, and Chiloba claims there was a transmission of provisional results. There was no such thing as provisional results. The results at the polling station were final. We've
talked about that, but you know where we came from with the issue of provisional results, because that is what we were used to. But when the Supreme Court said this, there can never be provisional results.
I think I'm the one who mentioned
and you see, you're part of it.
Yes, and Chiloba claims all parties observe the printing of ballot papers by Al-Ghurair. This is not what Ekura Okot said, but they were given opportunity.
Ekura Okot's agent was there. He went to
in Dubai,
and he released a statement from there. Raising a number of issues, which later on they clarified when they had come back. So the only party that never went was, I think, Jubilee and NASA. But the others
refused fundamentally. All right, that's the feedback. We still have a lot of them, but as one more. Zero hope for Kenya's electoral reform, since he claims that every past action by IEBC was, quote, professional. God protect us from the next election mess if he will be in charge again in 2022. Which brings me to the last part of our discussion. What are your plans? Are you planning after this suspension to go back to the commission? And what are you doing, just briefly?
But this suspension was for certain purposes. They were carrying out an audit for whether to go back or not.
Is it an audit or investigation? Because audit, you should be sitting there and responding to audit
and
queries.
I can't tell you that I don't know.
But then it's not an audit. Then
you see, this an investigation. You must be able to set out certain things that you're investigating. Up to now, actually, I do not know. And that's why I don't have to get into the details. The matter is in court. We'll be able to have it resolved. Whether I'm going back to the commission or not, I think at the right time for me to leave the commission, I'll be able to leave. In terms of what I'm doing, no, I've been lucky. One is that I started a lot more interactions with my upcountry place I grew up. And we're doing a few projects when it comes to agricultural investments, which is a good thing, something totally new to get me off the election. I also was able to complete a course, actually, a 6-month course at Oxford University on blockchain technology strategy. So some of the things perhaps we'll consider when it comes to election management in future. So I've used this opportunity for personal development in the hope that all these other issues will be resolved to allow us to be able to move forward.
All right. And in 15 seconds, do you regret your decision of leaving UNDP to join to work for the government?
Not at all. Today I actually have a lot of requests to go back to UNDP.
Same as
but where I am, I feel like no. I think serving the country or in public service has been more gratifying, especially at this particular level. And you never know what the future holds. So you must always make yourself available if something is good for you to go.
Well said. At 40, you have done probably well. So probably you like it serving the nation at that capacity.
Yes.
All right, and time now for Time Bar. Right, before we leave, it's the 7th day of August. Now, flashback to 2016. On this very date, some leaders who include Cabinet Secretary Eugene Wamalwa and 5 legislators allied to the Jubilee Party said they will support retired Archbishop Eliud Wabukala for the position of IEBC chairperson. Now, the argument at that time was Wabukala had impeccable record and Kenyans would have confidence in him. Now, during that period, IEBC had a very little credibility record and the Isaac Hassan team had agreed to vacate office. Now, the same day, Raila Odinga was called upon to declare his candidature for president. CS Mwangi Kiunjuri and Eugene Wamalwa urged him to contest because they were sure Jubilee would beat him hands down. And of course, at that time also Moses Wetangula asked him to back him. And finally, this was the first time Kenyans came face to face with the face of terror. The attack on the US Embassy, then located along Moi Avenue, claimed more than 200 lives and many more were injured. 20 years on. Now, this day is commemorated religiously with survivors and their families laying wreaths at the scene and conducting prayers. This is part of Kenya's dark history. So is the violence in every election cycle. Last election alone, it claimed more than 400 lives, according to the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights. Thanks for watching Sidebar. My name is Ken Mijungu. See you next Tuesday. We'd like to thank Ezra Chiloba and my team here for coming and sharing with us. And of course, thank you for your feedback. We go off air, but as always, we're still online. Good night.